What's the darkest episode of any children's show you've ever seen? That one episode of Pinky where he has a nightmare and is chased by that god-awful seal walrus and his bed is all animated and everything. Newt's Newt. That episode of the Magic School Bus where Arnold took his helmet off on Pluto to prove a point to his obnoxious cousin. Literally watched Arnold commit what should have been suicide in front of his teacher and classmates. That episode sure stuck with me. I remember appreciating how if he did that Iroh he would have had more than just a cold. Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Bad guys land ship. A bunch of kids from local village gather around excited about the supposed supply ship. Bad guy 1. Brother, what are we doing this far out in the galaxy? The Jedi won't be here. Bad guy 2. There's only one way to gain the attention of the Jedi at wartime. Lightsaber ignition camera pans to the children mass slaughter of the innocent, without compromise or mercy. Then they show his message he sent to the Jedi, including him decapitating like 5 people. When the Jedi get there, the whole village is on fire and nobody is there. The Clone Wars as a whole gets really dark in later seasons. The Danny Phantom episode where he goes to the future and learns that he killed his parents with his powers accidentally and went insane and becomes the biggest threat to the world. That was super dark. Oh, that storyline is great. Because later that future self comes to the past to essentially trick Danny into killing his friends and family, and therefore become his dark timeline self. Danny tries to stop it but future Danny tells him as long as I'm still here that means you lose. Really made me think about timelines and causality as a kid. That one episode of Fairly Odd Parents where he sees that everyone's life would be better off if he had never been born. There's actually a lot of references in that show to his parents resenting that he was even born. Does anyone remember that episode of Powerpuff where they get a large mentally and physically deformed sister who melts at the end of the episode, or was that the Calpol tripping me out when I was 7? For years I had these vague memories of an episode of Arthur about a fire at the school. For whatever reason I never actually googled it and just assumed that I either made up that episode in my head or was misremembering it. Well, I found out on Reddit not all that long ago that not only was that a real episode, but it was written in response to 9/11. Yup, the 9th of April. The one where Arthur gets night terrors about his dad dying and Binky has about as explicit PTSD as one can show on a children's show. That awful fricking heffalumps and woozles or whatever the frick they are seen in Winnie the Pooh scared the little crap out of me as a child. There's a Tom and Jerry ep set in revolutionist France and Tom fricks up, meaning he gets a guillotine. You don't see his head cut off but you see the top of the guillotine fall, followed by Jerry and his sidekick having a moment for Tom. It's a definitive moment of mortality for a popular cartoon character and it gave me the creeps back in the day. That episode was really dark. In another episode Tom went to heck in the end. He accidentally died and couldn't get into heaven if he didn't get Jerry to forgive him. Jerry didn't and Tom fell through the ground into a pool of lava where the bulldog tortured him. Pretty dark. Justice League where Superman was controlled into thinking he had a family in Krypton and the one where Batman had to kill a kid. Batman didn't kill her, he just couldn't save her, instead sitting with her till she died. The one episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender where they find that ancient library that was buried in the sand for hundreds of years and they go in and there's that giant owl spirit with the most unsettlingly monotone voice I've ever heard. Yes, I am Wan Shi Tong, he who knows 10,000 things. Season 1 Episode 7 Return of the Raggedy Android from My Life as a Teenage Robot. Available on Hulu. The robot gets a fake skin to make her look more real. However, it gained sentience and is terrifying. My daughter loves that show and watches horror movies like Nightmare on Elm Street with no problems. That crap terrified her and she specifically calls out not wanting to watch that episode still 8 months later. ONORMALGIRL. That time in Batman when Batgirl falls to her death on top of Commissioner Gordon's car, and he cradles her compassionately as she's dying, only to discover it's his own daughter dead in his arms. So he gives her a big public funeral, and when Batman attends he smashes over his daughter's coffin to shoot at him. Then he hacks his daughter's computer, discovers Batman's identity, and brings a full-on triple SWAT team to Wayne Manor and smashes the thing with fricking tanks. Worth noting that that was actually a nightmare dream sequence caused by the Scarecrow's fear toxin. Batgirl didn't actually die. Gordon didn't really turn on Batman, etc. Anyone else remember the episode of Different Strokes where the kids love to play at the pedophile's house? He does the spilt paint move on a boy and gets him to take his shirt off. There was an episode of Punky Brewster where they teach kids to play in old refrigerators. The Adventure Time episode where LSP murders her boyfriend because she thinks he's cheating on her by going to a business meeting, then erases her memory of him. And also erases him from existence, as he watches her erase her memory and freak out, and PB drinks. Happy episode. Not a show but a movie. My local television company went and marked the Japanese anime movie Grave of the Fireflies Hotaru no Haka as a children's show. Put it at 9 AM on a school holiday. I think hundreds were traumatized that day. My 2-year watches this awful show on Amazon called Super Truck. It's basically a truck that lives in a town full of cars and other machinery. There's one episode where this annoying pink car falls in the river in front of a police car. The cop car drives away to get help and basically leaves the annoying pink car to drown. Spoiler, Super Truck turns into a submarine and pulls her out. Cue. Helga on the couch from Hey Arnold. The episode that reveals that Helga was pretty much neglected and ignored by her parents from day one and that, despite the tough exterior, she was actually really vulnerable because she really was never loved by anyone. There is an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants where the Krusty Krab fails their health code inspection so they murder the inspector and spend the episode trying to hide the body. The dark deed you requested is done, sir. The episode of Pokémon in Pokémon Tower where Ash and Pikachu get crushed by a chandelier and temporarily turn into ghosts to pull pranks on their friends, subtly implying that they were killed on impact. One course meal from SpongeBob. Mr. Krabs decides to exploit Plankton's worst fear for his own personal gain, and does a victory gloat when Plankton attempts suicide. Animaniacs. There was an episode where Slappy the squirrel has a mental breakdown and Skippy has to take care of both of them. He gets more worn and haggard until the authorities come to take him into child protective custody, at which point Slappy snaps out of it. It was a rather spooky reflection of the reality of kids with alcoholic addict parents. It was not funny in the slightest, and I would imagine it was not intended to be. It was speaking directly to those kids, letting them know that they are not alone. The Animals of Farthingwood. Not sure many people outside of the UK and Ireland would have seen it, but it has a ton of dark episodes. It's probably not gonna be dark to most of you, but the episode of Ed, Edd and Eddy, where Eddie is knocked unconscious and wakes up like 40-50 years later as an old man. He starts to freak out and grabs a cane and hits himself over the head repeatedly, screaming, "I'm not old, I'm not old." Thanks for the upvotes, and sorry if I got some of this wrong. It's been a long time since I've watched it. The reason I said it's probably not dark for most of you is because none of my friends ever found it to be creepy scary. I sure as heck did, lol. I'm turning 18 in 2 weeks, and it would be truly terrifying to go to sleep one night and wake up the next day, aged by 50 years. I imagine that's how it is when you have Alzheimer's and eventually forget everything. Not an episode but a movie. Have you seen The Snowman? It's a wonderful animated Christmas movie with no words, only music. It's one of the sweetest children's movies you will ever watch, until the end. WTF. A series of unfortunate events is kind of a strange case, because the whole point of the series is to rub your face in how nothing goes well, but in the most hilarious way possible, so you can't help but chuckle. In the first episode, 3 children are orphaned, immediately taken in by their parents' murderer with no time to grieve, exploited, threatened with death, almost forced into marriage, and nobody listens to them or tries to help them. Those books might be a big part of why my sense of humor is as strange as it is. The imagination episode in SpongeBob. They imagine that they get stuck in a mountain and have to cut their legs off. First we establish a base camp at 15,000 feet. How about that episode of Tom and Jerry where Tom dies and is denied entrance to heaven because he was a dong to Jerry? He then has to apologize to Jerry to get him to sign a document which will let him enter heaven. Otherwise he'll be sent to heck, where a demonic spike taunts and threatens him. Also, when we see heaven, the gatekeeper, a cat with a book, is welcoming the newcomers, a cat that was ran over, etc. He hears something, then looks down, finding some kittens crawling out of an wet sack. He then shakes his head sadly, remarking the things some people do. I can't remember exactly what happened, but the Adventure Time episode with the creepy nurse. I remember visiting my cousin and being like, Jesus, this is scaring the crap out of me. If you think that's the darkest episode, boy do I have some news for you. Anybody remember Paul's Grand Adventure? The search for Christopher Robin? Heavy themes of loss and identity in that one. There were some truly tense moments that stuck with me as a child. I relate more to that movie as an adult than I did as a child. Steven Universe straight up shows a scene where Pearl considers murdering Steven as a baby. Also most episodes of Doctor Who. Are You My Mummy? The episode of Batman where Joker pushed Harley Quinn through a window after she had captured Batman, and she still apologized and said it was her fault. Frick anyone who says their relationship goals, that's abuse. The Widmageddon 3/4-part finale, depending on how it's broadcast, for Gravity Falls is dark. I can't say too much because of massive spoilers, but some smaller details include a man getting his mouth, eyes, and ears shuffled into different spots on his face, on-screen death, like, boom, vaporized, bada boom, bada gone, a live human being used as the bottle for a twisted game of spin the bottle, and of course the bad guy literally says I've got some children to make into corpses. Sometimes Pokémon goes freaking insane for an episode before going back to normal, bland, repetitive, child-friendly episodes. One episode, Capacia Island UFO plays out like a goddamn zombie alien horror film, but it's still pretty upbeat and tame. The Ghost of Maiden's Peak doesn't even sound like a Pokémon episode, except it is, and it's pretty spooky. Some of the Ghost episodes are actually kinda freaky, including the Litwick Mansion, where life energy is sucked out of people, but the cake absolutely goes to XY019, a conspiracy to conquer. It is freaking terrifying. Brainwashing is a major theme in the episode. The only way to avoid the brainwashing was to be sliced up by Meowth's claws. Yes, that is metal as frick. Ash's friends are, according to the internet, hypnotized by an evil person for the first time in Pokémon history. Literally everyone except Ash and Meowth were brainwashed at the end, and were only saved by Bulls. The worst part is that there was no satisfying conclusion. It's like if a Scooby-Doo episode ended and the villain just fricked off instead of being caught by the police, while saying that they still had a master plan involving some apocalyptic crystals. That's pretty scary, dude. So yeah, Pokémon gets weird. Don't forget Sabrina. As a kid I was terrified of that little girl and her dollhouse. I was like 4, but I couldn't watch the end of that episode of Brum where he got taken by the scrap merchant. They started lowering him into a crusher and I lost it. Bubble Buddy and SpongeBob kill a guy. SpongeBob is all like I'm gonna go get some snacks, you dig him up, referring to a guy they buried in the sand, and the guy looks up and is like, hurry up dude, the tide is coming in. And then at the end of the episode he's a ghost. The episode of Hey Arnold when Arnold loses his grandfather's pocket watch in the sewer and he has to beat the creepy butt rat sewer king in chess if he wants to get the watch back. In Steven Universe, there is an episode called Keeping It Together. The episode goes by as usual, the crystal gems chasing down a bad gem through this sort of abandoned mining area when Steven and Garnet go down to investigate these fusion experiments. The music begins growing sinister, a hand connected to a foot crawling across the floor. More of these strange gem creatures emerge and writhe on the floor, the music growing more twisted until finally, the light of a forming monster splits into what look like screaming faces. The forms corrupt and mesh together and form a giant monstrosity that looks like a hand, the music distorted. Garnet, the usually collected leader of the gems, begins to have a panic attack. Frozen in fear of what is essentially the corpses of other gems forcibly stuck together and reanimated. That scene was intense when I first saw it. I remember there was this episode of Gargoyles where for some reason Goliath had traveled into the future and one of the gargoyles had lost both his eyes in a battle. Not really dark but still really sad. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, the episode where Iroh is celebrating his dead son's birthday, that crap gets me straight in the feels every time. And I mean every time. I've watched it 4 times now and it still gets me close to tears. The darkest part being that the episode is dedicated to Mako, the original voice actor of Iroh, who died of cancer. Most Rocco, but probably the one where heifer chokes on a chicken bone from Choky Chicken and goes to heck. Also there's one episode with a gay prostitution joke that is pretty great. Adventure Time, just the whole background of that universe and how Finn's father abandoned him and doesn't give a crap about him no matter how hard he tries to get him back. Also Simon and Marceline. So there used to be this kids show on PBS called Liberty's Kids that was about the Revolutionary War. There's an episode early on where the one kid who represents the American Patriots, James, witnesses other patriots tar and feather a random sailor, and he is excited by it, because he's still a kid with a very simplistic, good v. evil view of the world. He thinks it's righteous justice and also hilarious. Near the end of the episode, his mentor adopted dad takes him to a doctor who's treating the sailor. Cut to a graphic description, though little is shown of exactly what happens to people who've been tarred and feather, specifically that their skin can peel off. What the frick? PBS. Not an episode, but I recently watched Chicken Run again and realized how fricked it was. Let's say you're a woman and you have lived your whole life imprisoned in a concentration camp where you have no hope and only one purpose, to ovulate. And on a daily basis your captors come around and collect your ovulations. But if you fail to ovulate, you are brutally murdered and your corpse eaten. It literally looks like a concentration camp. Ginger is put in solitary confinement. At one point Babs is knitting a noose, and the song during the dancing scene says now flip, flop fly don't care if I die. The episode of Tom and Jerry where they both get left by the cat mouse that they love. They get super depressed to the point of suicide and the episode ends with them sitting on train tracks, waiting for the train to come and finally end their miserable lives. The episode in Hey Arnold where Phil was telling Arnold about how his parents met each other etc. The end scene has Arnold dreaming about flying off in a plane into the distance. No comedy, no hyperbole, just that. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.